Welcome back my fellow Dragon Riders to the Triple S Variety channel. I'm your host Triple S, and in this video I'll be breaking down the first episode of the second season of House of the Dragon titled A Son for a Son. I'll go through how it compares and contrasts to the books, mainly Fire and Blood, the book the show is adapted from, though I will try not to spoil events that we know will happen from the book that have not yet happened in the show. Now let's begin. Point number 1, if you want to hear me break down and explain the opening credits, I've made that into its own video which you can find linked in the iCard in the top right hand corner and in the description below. Point number 2, Cregan Stark reveals that his ancestor Torrhen Stark, the last king in the north who bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror and thereafter became known as the King Who Knelt, would use decimation to decide who to send to the wall. Decimation here being used in the ancient Roman fashion of singling out one man in 10, though for the Romans this was so that then that one man would be murdered by the other 9 as a form of punishment for the whole group. Here however, one man in 10 is sent to man the wall rather than murdered, but even though Cregan says,
"This is not a sentence, but an honour,"
I would wager some would prefer death over spending the rest of their lives freezing cold and not being allowed to have a woman warm their bed at night. Point number 3, Cregan tells Jacaerys that his father Rickon Stark brought King Jaehaerys I and his sister Queen Alysanne to the wall, though in the books it was actually a much earlier ancestor, Alaric Stark. Also considering Cregan says Jaehaerys and Alysanne's dragons at Vermithor and Silverwing refused to fly over the wall, I guess David Benioff and D.B. Weiss just forgot about that when they had Daenerys and her 3 dragons, Drogon, Viserion and Rhaegal, fly over the wall in Game of Thrones Season 7. Point number 4, rather than Daemon calling Vhagar a hoary old bitch, in Fire and Blood it's actually Jacaerys who says it and not till later during the dance. Point number 5, Daemon references how Rhaenys didn't have Meleys burn Aegon and everyone else standing with him when he was crowned king at the end of Season 1 Episode 9. The reason she gives to Daemon and Rhaenyra in Episode 10 of Season 1 was that it wasn't her war to start, so she chose to do nothing. I wonder if Rhaenys will face another similar choice in the future, and if she again will choose to do nothing or instead do something. Point number 6, without spoiling anything, I'll just say the characters of Alyn and his brother that he mentions are major characters from Fire and Blood, with Alyn also having been mentioned in books 4 and 5 of A Song of Ice and Fire, A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons respectively. In the books however, Alyn and his brother never served in the Valyrian fleet, but on the 7 ships belonging to their mother, Merilda, and Alyn never saved Corlys' life during the War for the Stepstones, as the war actually ended the same year Alyn was born, 115 AC. Point number 7, we see more of Helena's prophetic abilities that are exclusive to the show, and it makes me wonder how much of the future can she actually see? Can she actually see what's going to happen, or is she just seeing an interpretation, like is she just seeing literal rats, or is she just getting a feeling she has with no actual visions? And if it is the case that she can see what's going to happen, why does she never try to do something to prevent it, or avoid it? I agree with Aegon, Helena really is a mystery. Point number 8, impossible as it is to believe, in all the books that cover the period of the Dance of the Dragons, no account ever confirms, hints at, or even speculates on there being a relationship between Alicent and Criston Cole. Point number 9, in the books Rhaenyra never went off with Syrax on her own to try and find Lucerys' remains near Storm's End, and rather than his ring, only Arryx's head and neck washed up. The dwarf Court Jester Mushroom, who at this point would be serving under Rhaenyra and whose account of the Dance of the Dragons called the Testimony of Mushroom is referenced extensively in Fire and Blood, claims that Lucerys' corpse also washed up on shore. Aemond then found Jacaerys' corpse and removed his eyes to make them a gift to Maris Baratheon, one of Lord Boris Baratheon's 4 daughters, the 4 Storms, on a bed of seaweed. Writer of Fire and Blood, Archmaester Gildane, since the IRL Fire and Blood book is meant to represent an in-universe book of the same name, says Mushroom's claim is excessive and that Grand Maester Munken's book, The Dance of the Dragons A True Telling, gives it, along with the claims that Vhagar snatched Lucerys off of Arryx's back and ate him whole, or that Lucerys survived his fall into the ocean and washed up onto shore having lost his memory, going on to spend the rest of his life as a simple-minded fisherman, no respect whatsoever. Point number 10, good thing none of the people fishing felt such loyalty to Aegon that they'd risk trying to kill Rhaenyra because all it would have taken would be an arrow or a bolt. Point number 11, I'm not sure really who's at fault here, Aegon or Otto. You could say Aegon for just making quick decisions without seeking advice from his hand first, but you could also say Otto for not learning what the petitions were going to be beforehand, so he could brief Aegon on what the best course of action would be. Actually, thinking about it, the fault does lie with Otto. How did he not predict that Aegon would make rash, uninformed decisions after seeing how he acted during the small council meeting, when advised he would need to be patient and cunning? Point number 12, again without spoiling anything, I'll just say Hugh here is a major character for Fire and Blood. What he's doing being in King's Landing in the show though, I don't know, since in the books he lives on Dragonstone. Point number 13, in Fire and Blood it's never never said that Rhaenyra told her council that she wanted Aemon dead. Instead, Rhaenyra received a message from Daemon, who was already at Harrenhal, saying an eye for an eye, a son for a son, Lucerys shall be avenged. Daemon then sent word to Mysaria, who was still in King's Landing, using her as a go-between to find suitable people to carry out this murder. Point number 14, Lady Jane Arryn in Fire and Blood asked the same thing of Jacaerys, dragging to protect her from the skies, according to Munken's true telling, despite a dislike for Daemon and how he treated his first wife, Rhea Royce. Mushroom, however, claims Jane offered allegiance to the Blacks only if Jacaerys could make her orgasm with his tongue. And Septon Eustace, whose book, The Reign of King Viserys, first of his name, and The Dance of the Dragons that came after, which Gildane also references throughout Fire and Blood, mentions the commonly believed rumour that Jane Arryn was in fact a lesbian, or at the very least bisexual, before saying the rumour wasn't even true. Though I will mention Jane never married and died in the arms of her dear companion, Jessamine Redfort. Point number 15, in the Grand Sept, Alicent lights a candle and says the name Alarie Florence, her mother's name, which is unique to the show as she was never named in the books. Point number 16, so in this point I'm just going to cover everything that was different between the show and Fire and Blood for this whole blood and cheese segment. Obviously, since Daemon was at Harrenhal and using Mysaria to arrange the avenging of Lucerys, that means he never snuck into King's Landing. Blood was a former sergeant of the City Watch, having lost his gold cloak when he beat a whore to death whilst drunk, and was instead now working as a butcher. While in the show, Blood agrees to Daemon's plan because he hates the High Towers, and Cheese accepts in return for gold to pay off his gambling debts, in Fire and Blood the only motive given is that of a reward if they deliver the victim's head to Daemon. And though Cheese says he knows Maegor's tunnels better than his own cock, in Fire and Blood the quote is attributed to Mushroom in regards to Cheese knowing the Red Keep as a whole. Daemon tells Blood and Cheese to find and murder Aemon in the show, but in Fire and Blood no specific target is named, though since the pair wait in a specific room for the arrival of Helaena and her children, it can be assumed they were specifically ordered to murder one of her sons. Presumably this is the answer to Cheese's question in the show of what he and Blood should do if they can't find Aemon. They should just kill any of the traitor royal family's sons they might discover. There's no mention of Blood and Cheese and Cheese's dog apparently of having to pass through the Red Keep's Great Hall right under Aegon's drunk nose, nor right under King Viserys I's stone nose. No confrontation between Blood and Cheese is mentioned in Fire and Blood, as Book Cheese is made out to know exactly where he's going, where all the rooms are, and who would be in which room at what time. And that room is Alicent's room in the Tower of the Hand, which she moved into after becoming Dowager Queen. In Fire and Blood, Blood and Cheese used the tunnels to get into her room, and Cheese bound and gagged her whilst Blood strangled her bedmaid, which in the show is what I thought was going to be the fate of this woman with the very prominent black eyebrows. Reminds me of Emma Stone in Poor Things. They knew that Helaena always brought her children to see Alicent before bed, so Blood and Cheese waited for them to arrive, and when they did, Blood killed her guardsman and Cheese grabbed her youngest child, Maelor. Which brings us to the fact that by this point in her life, Helaena actually had 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl, twins brother and sister Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, aged 6, and her youngest son Maelor, aged 2. The show, however, only shows us Helaena having 2 children, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, who look so alike Blood can't tell them apart and has to ask Helaena which one is the boy. This is quite different from Fire and Blood, where the question isn't which one is the boy, but instead, which boy do you want us to kill? Show Helaena appears to actually point them to the correct child to murder, which just sounds so wrong of me to say, whereas Book Helaena chooses for them to murder her youngest Maelor, either because the boy was too young to understand what was going on, or because Jaehaerys was Aegon's firstborn son and heir. But instead of killing Maelor, Blood decapitates Jaehaerys and the pair flee with his head, leaving everyone else unharmed. And as I said, Book Alicent was present for all of this, bound and gagged, not off making the beast with 2 backs like Show Alicent is with Kristen. Point number 17, fuck Cheese for kicking his dog, I hope he dies a horrible, painful death. Point number 18, did Helaena like hypnotize Cheese or something into believing that she was pointing to her son? And why did she point them to Jaehaerys since it now leaves Aegon without an heir? Does she hate her brother husband that much, or is it all part of some other vision prophecy thing that she's seen? To round all this off, my most disliked part of the episode goes to hot take the whole Blood and Cheese segment, due to how different and in my opinion worse it is compared to how it happened in Fire and Blood. The only reason I can think of why they dumbed it all down so much for the show, with no tied up Alicent, no strangled bedmaid, no murdered guardsman, no awake frightened children, no Helaena choosing her youngest to die, and no Blood decapitating the other son instead, and no hysterically screaming Helaena, was because if they tried to have all that stuff, it would be just too traumatizing to watch, like even more traumatizing than watching the Red Wedding, Shireen burning alive, Emma being cut open and murdered trying to save the baby, and they wouldn't be allowed to air it. And my most liked part of the episode goes to how Aegon acts throughout this episode. Not like how the actor acts, but how the character acts, with Helena when asking where Jaehaerys is at the small council meeting, though I think he was going too far when he was going to have Tywin give Jaehaerys a pony ride, when interacting with the small folk who have come to petition him, and when he's drinking with his buddies on the Iron Throne. It'll be interesting to see how the death of his firstborn son and heir affects how he acts in the coming episodes. Thank you all so much for tuning into the Triple S Variety channel. To not miss a video, be sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and why not leave a comment below putting out anything I missed but you noticed. I would love to hear from you all. I've been Triple S, you've all been amazing, and I shall see you all in the next video.